In this video, I'll describe what it's like trying to swim, bike, run, and attempt yoga in India. This trip took place in 2019. It was a 4-week honeymoon in which my wife and I travelled from the north of the country to the far south. We started our trip in Kolkata, which is India's third largest city. It's also one of the most densely populated cities in the country, with 24,000 people per square kilometre. Whenever we left the hotel, it was almost impossible to walk anywhere quickly. I read a quote that described India as a country that beats you up. Well, I think that's a fair description of Kolkata. Dealing with the noise, the traffic and the people felt like going 10 rounds with Mike Tyson. But don't get me wrong, the Indian people are some of the loveliest, friendliest people that I've ever met. And the difficulty I found first in Kolkata is probably because I come from a very small village and I'm not used to being in a place which has millions of people. One of my goals was to try and run a 5k in every single place that I visited in India. Was it possible in Kolkata? Yes, but only first thing in the morning when the roads and streets were much quieter. Even then, it proved a little bit difficult as the pavements were pretty uneven and you really had to watch your footing. Was it possible to get a swim in Kolkata? No, it might look quite pleasant there, but that was water you would want to swim in. Kolkata has amazing colonial architecture. This is one of the best known buildings, which is the memorial to Queen Victoria. Were we able to do yoga in Kolkata? Yes, a lovely man came to our hotel and he gave us a 30-minute class in the morning. Although it was a bit militaristic, he shouted a lot. There was none of this spiritual stuff you see in the UK. Next we moved on to Varanasi, which is regarded as the spiritual capital of India. Varanasi is considered a pilgrimage spot for Hindus. They believe that anyone who is graced to die and lands here attains salvation and freedom from the cycle of birth and We stayed in a small hotel by the banks of the river. There was only 4 rooms in the hotel, and one day when we got back, a man was coming out who stopped and seemed to recognise me. He shouted, "Andrew," which is actually my twin brother's name. He had worked with my brother many years ago and thought that I was him. Just proves it's a small world. Were we able to run a 5k in Varanasi? Yes. You could run one just beside the river here, although it was slightly tricky as there was lots of steps and animals and people around. Is it possible to swim in the river? Yes, you can. If you're Indian, there's a lot of people out swimming and enjoying the good weather. It was not recommended for foreigners because there's a lot of bugs in the water that our systems just are not used to. Is it possible to cycle in Varanasi? Yes, but not by myself. As you can see, the roads are very busy and congested and would be hard to navigate. But this poor guy offered to take us back to our B&B for a small fee. I don't think he realised that I'm 6'1" and 13 stone and that Varanasi actually has a slight hill. He found it very difficult to take me along to B&B, and when we got there he tried to charge 10 times as much as he'd quoted. Is it possible to do yoga here? Yes, I managed to do a 30-minute session with a man who, when I walked into his studio, pointed at a yoga mat, but there was a dead mouse in it. I said, "I don't want to use that, it's got a dead mouse." So he picked up another yoga mat. I assumed he was going to give it to me, but no, he used the other yoga mat to knock the mouse off the first yoga mat and then gave me the first one to use. Yoga in India is very practical. Next we moved on to the capital, Delhi. I'd visited Delhi previously, I think approximately 15 years ago. I attended the wedding of a friend of a friend. At that wedding, I was the only white person there, and it's probably the only time I will ever experience reverse racism. I was standing in the reception holding a bit of cake, and an Indian man came up to me and tried to take it off me as he assumed I was the waiter. Is it possible to run a 5k in Delhi? Yes, the pavements and roads are pretty good in a lot of places, and there's a lot of options for going to parks to go for a run. Although in this park there was something a bit more unusual, a 3-legged race. Is it possible to go for a swim in Delhi? Yes, In our hotel, there was a swimming pool that we had full access to, and I was able to go out and have a swim. But it was in February, and the water was just a little bit colder than it would be at any other time of year. I was, though, very impressed by these statues that were in the corridor leading up to the pool. Whilst in Delhi, I was stopped a number of times by Indian men asking if they could take a photograph. I said yes, no problem at all. And then they would hand me the camera and ask if I would take a photo of them with my wife. One man, though, did ask if he could have my photograph, and he said he was so pleased to meet me. He'd never thought that he would meet me in person. I wasn't very sure who he meant, so I thought, well, who do you think I am? He went, well, you're Lionel Messi, of course. I think if you ever see 5'4" Lionel Messi and a picture of myself, you'll know we don't look anything alike. Did we bike or do yoga in Delhi? No, this was the one place where I did feel slightly ill. I think I ate something that disagreed with me, and I spent a morning feeling slightly queasy. Next, we headed to Goa to join a week-long yoga retreat. Goa is a beautiful country with beaches and tropical conditions. The yoga retreat was really interesting. A typical day would be getting up at 7 o'clock to do a meditation. I'm not really into meditation, so I used to use that time to go for a run, as the early morning was the only opportunity in the day when it wasn't too hot to be able to do a 5k run. At 8 o'clock we would do a 90-minute yoga practice, and after that we would have breakfast. I would spend the morning swimming and sitting on the beach before heading for a delicious lunch. After breakfast you had free time to be able to surf or go swimming. In the afternoon there would be a specialty class focusing on a specific area of yoga. One day there was a class called Wild Women of Yoga. It's fair to say this class was not aimed at me, but my wife convinced me to go along to it. It involved dancing without any music whatsoever. At the end of it, lots of women burst into tears and said what an emotional experience it was and how amazing. They all hugged and thanked each other for going. I did the very British thing of just walking around the room, shaking everyone's hand and going, well done, now let's never talk about this ever again. The thing I enjoyed most about the camp was the food. There was an amazing selection every night, including all of these desserts. And these desserts, and more desserts, and if you haven't had enough of dessert, here's some more desserts. And some more desserts. Next we headed to Bangalore, as we had friends who were living in the city. It's probably not the first choice of tourists to India to visit here, as it's quite a modern metropolitan area full of large American companies and other organisations. One of the best things about it is that it's full of pubs. I'm assuming that's because of all the large multinational companies that are based there, that their employees want to have a beer in the evening. Is it possible to do a 5k here? Yes, it was actually quite straightforward. Probably one of the easiest because it's so modern, the pavements are good and the streets are quite easy to navigate. It also had the bonus that there was lots of really good wee cafes which served amazing food. Were we able to ride a bike or do yoga in Bangalore? No. I think I spent too much time in the pub and not enough time looking up how to do either of those exercises. Next we headed to Kerela, which has been described by National Geographic magazine as one of the top 10 paradises in the world. We had arranged a cycle trip through a company called Spice Tours, who take small groups on 3, 4 or 5 day trips through the beautiful waterways of Kerala. We met up with our group in the capital, Kochi. We were very lucky in that there was only one other family travelling with us, who was 2 daughters and a mother from Chile, who were very nice people. The trip itself comprised a van with driver and a tour guide who would lead each day. In the morning he would describe what the route was going to be. Normally he would say it's going to be 70 to 80k, but every day was only 40 to 50k. So I'm not sure if he was very good at measuring maps. Or maybe he thought they'll be really pleased if every day is shorter than I say it is. Due to the warm weather, we would normally do the majority of the cycling in the morning. So if it was a 50k day, we'd do 40k before lunch, then stop, have a huge, normally 3-course lunch, and then once we were full, back onto the bike to do 10k to a hotel. This was not a backpacking trip. What we would do is ride our bikes to a hotel, and then we'd have full use of the facilities for the night, which was great because it meant that we would get a nice dinner, and normally there'd be a swimming pool to be able to have a swim. The roads were usually very, very quiet, and we hardly saw any traffic at all, but there are a couple of occasions where you have to go into busier towns. Now, the way they deal with that is that the van would drive ahead of us and then park right across the middle of a busy road, blocking all traffic. We'd then be able to cycle along until we got to a turning that was a bit quieter and then continue our journey. The van would then unblock the road and carry on. Not something you'd see in this country at all, but it was very effective and worked very well. Kerala is full of waterways. One of the nice things about this trip is that on the last night you get to stay in a houseboat. A few people did ask when I came back from India whether I'd got Delhi belly, and I'd managed to mostly avoid it. I think other than one morning in Delhi itself, I felt perfectly fine. My tip, I don't know if it will work for everyone, is just to have vegetarian food. As for some reason, I think a vegetable is less likely to make me ill than a bit of meat. Is there any science behind that? Absolutely none whatsoever, but it seemed to work for me, so it's worthwhile giving it a go. The other question I got asked when I come back was how easy it was to travel around India. It's relatively straightforward. There's lots of cheap airlines that you can use. The bit to be aware of is just how long it takes to travel from one place to another. That's not just the travel time, but it's the time to get to the airport, the couple of hours in the airport first to clear security, and then normally there would be a delay itself as they wait for a plane to arrive to the next one. It was very rare for a plane to actually leave on time. And this was mainly due to the time of year that we were there. So we were there in February, and the north of the country was very foggy, which meant that airports commonly couldn't let planes take off, which would then back up all the planes everywhere else, because the plane in the south might be waiting for a plane from Delhi to arrive, and it just amounted to delay after delay after delay. We just assumed that if we were travelling by plane on any specific day, then that would be the whole day taken up by travel. My favourite thing about travelling to India was the form you have to fill in advance to be able to get permission to go to the country. One of the questions, and I'm paraphrasing slightly here, was, are you a genocidal maniac? I took no. But it did make me think that if you are a genocidal maniac, you're probably also the sort of person who lies on their forms. So I'm not sure it's a particularly valid question. But maybe there is a dictator out there who thinks, I'd really love to go to India, but oh no, I have to answer yes to this question. Would I recommend India as a place to visit? Yes, it is probably one of the most amazing countries in the world. And as you can see from this video, it changes dramatically from location to location. There really is something for everyone here. During each day there was stops, so we could see some of the local industry and people going about their daily lives. I can't for the life of me though remember what they were doing here. It looks like they're boiling 2 big plates of soup. The last part of the cycle trip took us to the houseboat, although it was not the big massive one you're about to see in a second. Our boat was smaller, it had 2 bedrooms on board, but it did come with a personal chef. Job was to cook dinner and breakfast the next day. The boat trip is a highlight to many people on this tour, but I have to admit, as a man who has taken many boats in his life, that I found it just a little bit dull. Which says more about me than it does about the boat trip, because it was a stunning vessel and everyone was so friendly. But I get bored very easily. I blame TikTok, Twitter and every other form of social media for hardwiring my brain to needing stimulation every 2 seconds. Because how could you get bored when you have amazing sunsets like this one here? On the last day we had a short ride back into Cochin. It was at this point we saw our first elephant of the ride. Now when I was here many years ago, I actually saw elephants wandering around Delhi, but in modern times this has now been banned. If you are thinking of visiting India and maybe you are a bit intimidated by the prospect, then I would recommend Kerala as a great starting place, as people are warm and friendly, it's very easy to get about, and there's lots of choices of a good accommodation and things to do. Our last stop was Mumbai, which is home to the Indian film industry. As you can see, the local architecture looks a bit European, and as you'd walk around, you would see films being shot. In this case, you can see it's a rainy scene, and then the rain just stops almost immediately. Any part not being used for filming was used for playing cricket. No video can truly do justice to just how wonderful a country India is, but I hope this gives you a very brief overview of a number of the places you could visit if you ever decided to go to the country. All I can say is give it a try and you won't regret it.